little over a month away, one of the core features that it's going to have is responsive images. And Joe is one of the lead developers and proponents of trying to get it inside of Core. So I figured I'd have him on to sort of explain to me and to our listeners what responsive images are, what we can look forward to, and maybe the foundation it sets for things that could be done in the future. But before we get into that, I'll tell you a little bit about Joe. He's a web designer and developer at the Washington University in St. Louis. In fact, I had a chance to meet him in person at WordCamp St. Louis earlier this year. He's a WordPress contributor, if you didn't know that by now, and he's also one of the lead developers, of course, behind the Responsive Images project for WordPress 4.4. Joe, thanks a lot for taking some time today to sort of just tell me about all this cool stuff about responsive images.
Yeah, man. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
So when I met you way back, at earlier this year at WordCamp St. Louis, we briefly talked about this, and at the time I said, okay, well, I can kind of see how this would be cool or something to have in WordPress. And I know we've talked about it off and on, and now we're at the point where, hell, it's actually going to be something that's in WordPress. So before we sort of dive into it, describe to the audience what responsive images is and sort of the journey you've taken to get to this point where it's going to be actually a part of Core and WordPress.
Yeah, that's good. So responsive images is a kind of a shorthand for some new tools that have been added to the HTML spec. Conversation around that started with a group called the Responsive Images Community Group. I think back in 2012, I want to say, trying to solve the problem of how do you make sure that users that are on smaller devices or devices that are underpowered don't have to download gigantically large images when they really have no use for them. And so some new HTML has been added to browser specs that allows you basically to tell the browser that you have multiple versions of the same image that you want to provide, and the browser can then select the most appropriate image depending on lots of different factors. That's sort of the shorthand. There's also some really cool things happening with the picture element, which some people may be familiar with, which allows you to do different image sources based on everything from sort of the size of your screen to whether your browser supports a certain type of image like WebP or some things like that, which is cool. But that's a little bit further down the road than what we're getting into for WordPress. So basically, now that a lot of browsers are supporting the new syntax, which is two attributes that you can add to images called source set and sizes. Since that's now available, and since WordPress has always, or at least for a long time, made a bunch of different image sizes of your images when you upload them. They cut like the medium, the large, that sort of thing.
Yep.
We thought, hey, let's make use of the images we already have sitting on the server, put them in a source set attribute on all of the images that we show in WordPress, and we automatically sort of get the benefit of this new responsive images tool set, and sort of can really help, hopefully, lots of people take advantage of this responsive images tooling.
And I think what's cool is that some of the same people who are writing and implementing the responsive image HTML spec, the big time spec, are some of the same people helping to implement this into WordPress.
Yeah, that's right. We've had lots of help from the folks that are writing the spec, pulling all that together. Matt Marquis, who is the one of the chairs of the Responsive Images group, if not the chair of the Responsive Images group, has been really helpful for us in terms of making sure that we're implementing things correctly and helping to get the word out about the plugin that we created earlier this year, which was sort of the basis of this getting into core, helping to get the word out so that, you know, we got a lot of people to kind of look at it, install it, help us track down bugs, and really make sure that we're doing this in a way that makes a lot of sense. So it's been great.
Which by the way, the plugin is activated. Last time I checked, is activated on over 10,000 WordPress sites. So I would think that's a considerable testing ground.
Yeah, no, it's definitely nice whenever you're going to add a new feature to WordPress to be able to say, hey, we're not doing this just out of nowhere. We've got an actual, you know, user group test case. We've sort of like vetted that this kind of makes sense before adding something to core.
So throughout the progression of the plugin, have you come across any major bugs or major things that have been fixed to make the process of including something like this in the core easier?
Well, I'll tell you that probably the biggest challenge that we have run into, that we've sort of gone back and forth on, is that just the way that WordPress works with images is that the images that you have in your post content, the HTML markup for that image gets saved into the database, you know, with your posts. So if you insert an image into the post and then you go to the text editor instead of the WYSIWYG editor, like the MCE editor, you'll see the whole, you know, HTML for the image sitting there, and that all gets saved to the database. Which means that initially when we created the plugin, only images that you added to posts from the moment that you installed the plugin forward would get responsive images. Anything on an older post would not get responsive images, because we didn't want to go through and rewrite all of your posts in your database. You know, that's kind of dangerous. And one of the other things that we wanted to make sure of is that if we were going to filter all of those images on the front end, like when the page loads, we would need to do it in a way that is fast enough so that it doesn't slow down your site loading, you know, for us to do all that processing on the front end. So eventually we sort of solved that speed issue. And so we've sort of moved that direction. So we're no longer saving the responsive images markup in the database. We're doing it on the front end when the images are displayed, and it's a way nicer way to work with all of that. So
now, throughout the process of working on this to get it implemented in the core, throughout the merge proposal process, some people have argued that responsive images should be something that themes should opt into, and it shouldn't be turned on by default. And based on what I've seen, it's going to be turned on by default in WordPress. So what are the pros and cons between the two, and why was the decision made to just make it on by default?
You know, I think in some ways it's WordPress implementing HTML spec. It's not necessarily a big change to themes that would affect their, like, the way the theme is displayed necessarily. And so I think that was the thinking. Really, I left that decision to the core developers to sort of make, and any theme that doesn't want to get responsive images can easily opt out with the filters that are in play.
I think one of the arguments against it is that themes that are maybe not responsive by default, that maybe this wouldn't benefit them, or maybe it will not make the theme look as well as it should. But I don't know.
No, yeah, that's a good point, and that's probably that's something that could be clarified a little bit. And so even if a theme is not responsive, one of the things that responsive images also handles is the difference in the image size for like higher density displays versus lower density displays. So your Retina display on like a new Mac laptop or on an iPhone or something like that can, you know, oftentimes people will load larger images than are necessary in order to sort of like take advantage of sort of the Retina, you know, sort of density, that sort of thing. And using the responsive images markup, even if your site is not responsive, would allow for your smaller devices and devices that don't need all of that to get a smaller, more appropriately sized image, save yourself some bandwidth, save your users some bandwidth, that sort of thing.
So kind of some questions I have, and I think you sort of alluded to them or sort of answered them already, but does this mean after WordPress 4.4, I'll be able to use one image, maybe insert an image into a post that will look appropriate on multiple devices versus multiple images for specific viewports? Is that what's happening here? Is it still using multiple images that WordPress creates?
Right. So it basically, the image will now include references to all of the different image sizes that you have that are available, that are like the soft crops in using sort of WordPress terms.
So if, like, for instance, on the Tavern, I use these, the featured image is about 650 pixels by 250 pixels tall. And sometimes, depending on some of the big images we use, like in the post content, they could be upwards of a couple 100K because, if we didn't optimize them. But there are smaller versions of that same image created by WordPress. And I've already had complaints from some people, and I've experienced this myself browsing the Tavern site on my iPhone. It's not a very good experience when those images are a couple 100K or they reach up to a meg. So with this responsive images, I'll be able to, it'll automatically show me a smaller version of that image, which obviously is going to be smaller and speedier to load.
Yeah, that's the idea. So as long as you have another image crop of that, crop of that image that's the same sort of height and width ratio, because it all needs to fit in the same ratio, right? If you've got a hard crop that is a very specific size and it's the only size that you have of that ratio, it won't get this benefit. But as long as you've got other images sitting there that are the same ratio, they'll be included in this source set attribute. And if your somebody is browsing the site and has a browser that does support the new HTML markup, they'll download the smaller image if it's more appropriate.
Okay, well that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Now, one of the discussions that's happened since the approval of this being merged into WordPress 4.4 is the discussion that maybe there should be a new image size created between. We already have large, and then we have medium, and maybe there should be a medium in between those two.
A medium large.
Yeah, medium large.
Yeah, we're actually.
What's the argument for creating a new image size?
We're actually working on that right now. So I mean, the thought process there is that that if you are on a Retina device and you have included the medium size, right now that would get bumped up to the large size, and that. You probably don't need the large size. You probably could do with something a little bit smaller. So including the medium, sort of a medium large that is closer to sort of the content width of your site, or that's closer to like 2 times the medium size. We just save your users a few more pixels, a few more megabytes on their, when they're downloading. It's going to save you some hosting money if you've got bandwidth caps, that sort of thing.
Oh, okay. So do responsive images allow for better theme compatibility in terms of images used in the design? Because a common issue nowadays, I've noticed all these different themes have different use cases. Sometimes they come packaged with their own specific set image sizes that you can use, so they look best in that theme. But if we use responsive images, will those images translate or look better? In terms of theme compatibility, where you could switch to different theme, but the images still look good?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's definitely going to be something that I think theme developers are going to want to take a really hard look at, which is if you're creating themes that do cut specific sizes, and there's some good use cases for when you need, a very specific crop for your layouts to look good. You're going to make sure that there are enough versions of that crop in different sizes at different widths, so that you get the benefits of responsive images. But I would also say that generally when you don't need to have specific ratios for your layouts when you can do sort of variable height images, and you're going to get, you know, the use out of all of the responsive images and all of the things that WordPress is doing by default in terms of, you know, cutting a bunch of different versions of images when you upload them that you know, you will be nice without having to do a whole lot of extra work. So it's something that theme developers definitely are going to have to keep in mind.
And so what happens to the plugin? You know, let's say someone's using the responsive images plugin right now and they upgrade to WordPress 4.4, will automatically be deactivated and they won't see any changes, and then WordPress 4.4 will handle images for them from now on. What's going to happen?
Yeah, correct. The idea, and we've got a little bit of work to do to get this ready to go, but the idea is that once 4.4 comes out, if you're running that plugin, we'll just shift everything to the functions that are happening in core without you having to do anything. Now, there are some other things that we've been experimenting with in the plugin that we aren't including in core, that we'll continue to do in the plugin. So there will still be some value for folks that are using the plugin to keep it installed and keep it active. But we'll make that a little more clear once the time comes. Things like, one of the things that's really exciting that we didn't get a chance to do this time around, but we're hoping to make some progress on in the future, is improving just the compression that WordPress uses natively when you upload an image, so that those file sizes are even smaller. The challenge that we ran into there is just that the new settings that we had kind of come up with were taking a little bit too much computing power for some shared hosts and that sort of thing. So if you uploaded a big image, sometimes they would fail, and that's not.
Yeah, I noticed.
Not good
I noticed some of those settings, the way you guys had to configure that on websites that had a beefy amount of RAM and processing power. You guys were able to get upwards of 50% improvement.
Oh, it was great. It's super magical when it works. And Dave Newton is a really smart developer up in Toronto that did a bunch of work on that. I think there's he did an article. I forget where he published that, but I can send you a link that sort of describes some of the settings we were playing with, and it's really great.
Well, we know that there's millions of WordPress sites out there on dinky shared hosting, so it's better to play the role of lowest common denominator for those settings.
Yep, it's true.
So one of the things I was thinking about, does responsive images pave the way for WordPress at some point, maybe in the future, to possibly be smart enough to where it can display images without the user having to worry about specific pixel sizes? I mean, if we look at the way images in WordPress work today, you upload a featured image, WordPress crops it to 3 or 4 different image sizes. There's specific pixels, and you have to pick which one for your use case that you want to use it in. And I was thinking maybe, and Morten Hendrickson kind of has this idea where maybe in the future you upload an image, and now the image, you don't have to worry about specific pixels. It's all about percentages. Right. WordPress is just very smart in the way it displays an image. I'm kind of looking forward to that.
Yeah, he's written some great articles about that. Him and I have had some conversations about that, and I think he's right. Generally speaking, by the time you start talking about responsive images and the power of responsive images, you no longer really need to worry about the image size of an image in a post. You're really more talking about the layout size, in which case you can sort of ignore the size of the files inside of it, because WordPress can kind of handle that for you. And so from a user standpoint, especially a non-developing user that is really more interested in publishing and dragging an image into their post and then resizing it to the size they want it to be for the layout, they shouldn't really have to think about, like, oh, am I using medium, or am I using large, or am I using, that sort of thing. Like, they should just be like, here's my image, here's the size, go nuts. And WordPress can kind of calculate the rest of it for them. And responsive images kind of gives that ability, kind of sets us on the path to be able to do that, which is nice.
Yeah, that's the part of WordPress's future in terms of how it uses images that I'm looking forward to. And it would also be nice if somehow we could get to a point where, a common problem today is, especially with media-heavy websites, is because WordPress creates all these different images from one, a lot of websites run into this too many files on the web host error. There's just so many images that they run into an issue on on their hosting account. So hopefully at some point we can get by with maybe just one or two images, and then they can scale up or down and still look great without having to create all these different kinds of images.
Yeah, and that part's probably a little bit trickier. More and more storage is cheaper, and so that's probably it's probably easier to solve the let's make the images that are needed when they're needed problem than it is to
just eliminate those files from being created regardless.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, you want to have as many files available as possible so that users are only downloading sizes that they need. And there's definitely a trade-off there between how many files do you have sitting on the server taking up storage space versus do you have just a few files, but now you've got users that are downloading bigger images than are needed. So there's probably a happy medium in there somewhere, and it's going to be a little bit different probably for everybody. But that's one of the reasons that we were kind of hesitant about whether or not we added a new size initially. But I think that the benefits sort of outweigh the trade-off in this instance.
And I think you've mentioned this before, but let's say when the Tavern upgrades to WordPress 4.4,
yep,
will anything happen to all of my existing images that are attached to post, or is it just from that point on I'll start to see the benefits of having responsive images in core?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm surprised you guys aren't running. You're not running WordPress Tavern on Trunk.
Yeah, we're not. Yeah, well,
no, I'm kidding you. No, I mean,
I've really thought about it.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe not on your production site, but no, I mean, really, you won't have to do anything. Any post that you've ever published should immediately get the benefit of loading any of the sizes that are available for those images directly into those posts when they're viewed on the front end. So you shouldn't have to do anything there. If you have some custom sizes, you may want to go in and optimize the sizes attribute that gets generated. We sort of are going to ship with what we consider kind of a smart default, but it's not perfect. It could be improved upon, but it's really would need to be done at the theme level. And I'll be writing about that pretty soon. Some instructions, and we're adding sort of an example to 2016, the default theme, that can kind of help explain a little bit how somebody would filter the sizes attribute. But generally speaking, no. I mean, as soon as you upgrade to 4.4, you get the benefit automatically without having to do anything, and that should be kind of nice. That was sort of the idea. We assumed that most people aren't going to know anything about responsive images at all, and we wanted to be able to just sort of provide this without them having to think, without any.
Yeah, there's no settings to configure, nothing. It just happens.
It just happens, exactly. That was sort of the idea.
That's what they call magic.
Oh.
So before we wrap it up here,
yeah.
this has just been a sort of a great insight into this feature, and I come away with a better understanding of how it works.
Great.
Describe your experience now that you've gone through it. You're almost at the end of it, but you're going through it now.
Yeah.
Of sort of suggesting and then working on getting a feature that you're passionate about into the core of WordPress software that's going to be run on, your code's going to be run on nearly 25% of the web. How can you describe sort of the process thus far for maybe other people that may be close or in a similar position as you?
Sure. No, I mean, I would say, I started doing some core contributing probably about a year ago. Just, I've been a longtime WordPress user and have developed, sites on WordPress, but hadn't really got into like working on WordPress itself until about a year ago, and kind of got in there and saw how things worked and kind of got involved and was interested in this feature and found a place to sort of plug in there and it's been really great to see how the folks who've been contributing for a long time are super helpful in sort of pointing you in the right direction and sort of cheering you on as you work on stuff like this. I think I sort of lucked into the fact that this is sort of a popular feature idea. So
Well, that always helps.
I just
When
I
you
just
can
sort of
get
come
when you
along
can
for the
get
ride a
members of
little
the
bit.
core team backing you, that always helps.
Yep. So, I bet on the right horse, I guess you could say. But no, it's been, a lot more work than I expected, but it's been really, really fun to be involved in. And I'm learning a ton, and hopefully have helped to bring some tools to people that are going to be helpful for a lot of folks. That's sort of the idea. So, yeah, it's been a good experience. I would definitely recommend people getting involved if they're interested. You don't have to be a great developer to get started.
Well, I'll tell you what, there are plenty of things for people out there to be excited about for WordPress
Yeah.
4.4, both from a user and developer standpoint. And Joe, thanks a lot for spearheading the effort with some other people and helping to make my WordPress better.
Yeah, it's been a great team of folks involved in the process, and it's been fun to kind of help play my role. So I'm looking forward to seeing it launch in about a month.
Awesome. So that's going to wrap it up here for our short interview. Joe, how can people keep in touch with you or keep tabs on what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Joe McGill. I'm also, you can find me on most of the WordPress channels in Slack, that sort of thing. And that's probably the best way.
Awesome. Well, let's make sure to stay in touch.
Yeah, man.